Ah, the Hungarian kingdom. Castles rising above rivers, kings crowned with holy relics, knights swearing loyalty, priests chanting in Latin. From outside it looked holy, noble, glorious. But behind the stone walls, darkness, secrets, whispers that history dared not write. Before I share these forbidden tales, hit subscribe, because trust me, what happened in medieval Hungary did not stay in medieval Hungary. Let's start with the nobles. Hungarian lords loved their power, and they displayed it not only on battlefields, but in their private halls. They invented cruel trials of obedience, where attendants and servants were forced to prove loyalty through humiliation. Some were locked in cellars, others treated as mere possessions. For these lords, cruelty was entertainment, obedience a game with no winners. And the queens? They too held their secrets. In Buddha's glittering palaces, gossip told of royal ladies who blurred lines of power and play. Some staged masquerades where attendants dressed as warriors or captives, while others transformed their chambers with silks, perfumes, and role-play that mocked the very traditions they upheld in public. The clergy, supposedly holy, were far from innocent. Monasteries became places of hypocrisy, where feasts ran late into the night, sacred wine flowed too freely, and vows of chastity dissolved in shadows. Peasants whispered that abbots demanded gifts, and that priests preached by day but mocked the altar by night. On the battlefield, knights carried not just banners and swords, but also a reputation for cruelty. Victorious armies left villages burned and captives taken. What began as conquest often turned into exploitation, where human lives were traded like spoils of war. And then there were the older traditions. In remote valleys and dark forests, pagan customs refused to die. At night, villagers gathered around bonfires, wearing masks, chanting forgotten names, and performing rites that mixed prayer with frenzy. Outsiders saw madness, but insiders swore it kept the old gods alive. Even kings were not free from scandal. Behind chapel doors, rulers prayed like saints, but in their private chambers, they presided over nights of excess, turning their courts into theaters of power and humiliation. What was sacred by day often turned obscene by night. Hungary's crown shone bright, but its shadow was long. Priests sinned, nobles mocked, kings abused, peasants suffered. History recorded battles and banners, but the whispers of corruption linger on, carried like smoke through the corridors of time.
So, what do we learn from Hungary's golden age? That crowns, crosses, and castles may shine, but inside they hid filth, greed, and lust beyond imagination. History tells us about battles and borders, but the real stories, the unspeakable ones, are the ones no scribe dared write. The Hungarian kingdom gave us kings, knights, and legends, but behind the glory, it gave us nightmares dressed as nobles. The first part gave you kings, priests, and nobles, drowning in filth. But Hungary's story doesn't stop there. No, the rot ran deeper, into villages, into monasteries, even into the battlefield camps where blood mixed with pleasure. Let's pick up where we left off. The Hungarian countryside looked peaceful. Rolling hills, quiet farms, bells ringing from village churches. But behind closed doors, darkness spread. Many lords believed they owned not just the land, but the bodies of the peasants who lived on it. If a farmer married, the lord sometimes demanded the first night with the bride. Yes, the infamous right of the first night. For peasants, marriage was sacred. For nobles, It was just another sport. And when traveling knights stopped at villages, hospitality turned into nightmare. Some demanded women as part of their welcome. Refusal could mean burned fields or broken bones. Imagine the terror. A knight smiling at your dinner table, already choosing which girl he'd take before the night ended. But let's step inside monasteries again. By day, chanting, prayers, holy rituals. By night, rumors tell us monks drank strong ale, stripped off their robes and held gatherings that were closer to tavern brawls than holy worship. In some abbeys, monks and nuns secretly met through tunnels, exchanging vows of silence for nights of forbidden touch. Candles that once lit holy books now flickered over naked skin. And then came the courts of law. You think justice was fair? Think again. Powerful men twisted trials into spectacles of shame. Accused women were sometimes stripped in front of audiences, punished not only with words, but with humiliation designed for the amusement of nobles. Judges, cloaked in velvet, pretended it was justice, but behind their smirks, lust and cruelty. The army had its own brand of filth. Hungarian campaigns into neighboring lands didn't just bring back loot, they brought back prisoners. Some were paraded like trophies, others were kept as living spoils, used at will by soldiers and commanders. Around campfires, men laughed, gambled, and traded prisoners as though they were dice or coins. The deeper the night, the darker the acts.
Hungary wore its crown with dazzling pride, but behind the stone and gold lay long shadows. Old pagan rites lingered in the forests, bonfires on hilltops, masked gatherings where the line between celebration and menace blurred. These weren't simple dances, they carried a raw, unsettling energy, rituals that claimed dignity and left a bitter hush afterward. Royal courts offered no sanctuary. Power became a theater of cruelty. At certain feasts, jest and ritual slid into calculated humiliation. Courtiers reduced to playthings for a night, servants subjected to caprice and mockery, while nobles feasted and laughed. When the wine ran low, the pageantry sometimes turned vicious, and the laughter left a metallic aftertaste that lingered in the corridors. Even queens were not immune to scandal. Behind embroidered curtains, the court sometimes became a place where rank warped private life into performance. Roles reversed, rules discarded, and etiquette bent to satisfy whims. Vows and prayers meant little when authority chose to rewrite human boundaries. Perhaps the most haunting legacy was how young lives were shaped by that world. Children taken into noble households learned early that power could demand obedience without pity. Their childhoods were shortened by an education in subservience and silence. What began as upbringing too often turned into something colder and more habitual. The chroniclers wrote of banners and battles, of saints and triumphs, but they rarely recorded these private cruelties. Monastic scribes preserved the state's glory and left the stains between the lines. So these stories survive only in whispers, rumors, and the uneasy metaphors of folk memory. Hungary's crown shone bright, but the kingdom's true shadow was long. Priests who failed, nobles who mocked, rulers who abused their privilege, and a people who learned to keep silence. The result was a culture where the unspeakable could root itself quietly inside stone walls, a darkness the public face of glory never addressed. The nobles of Hungary had a reputation, bold in battle, shameless in bed. Their obsession? Power over flesh. When a noble rode into a village, peasants didn't bow just for loyalty. They bowed out of fear of what rights the master might claim. The so-called first night rite wasn't just a rumor, it was often demanded. A bride could walk into church pure and trembling, only to spend her wedding night not with her groom, but in the Lord's chamber. And if she resisted, her family risked losing their land, their animals, or their lives. But why stop with peasants? In candlelit palaces, nobles kept whole harems of slaves, captured during wars with Turks, Czechs, or Poles. These women weren't wives, they were possessions, chained in chambers beneath the castle, summoned at will. Some accounts tell of girls dressed as angels, forced to sing hymns before being dragged into acts that mocked the very church above. Irony wasn't lost here, it was deliberate. And the church, oh dear, don't think the clergy were innocent. Bishops in jewel-encrusted robes preached morality on Sunday, then joined feasts of excess by Monday night. Monasteries weren't just places of prayer. Whispers say some abbeys became brothels in disguise. Wine barrels rolled into cloisters, choir boys forced into service. Monks who copied scriptures by day scribbled obscene poems by candlelight. If there is a sin, Hungary's clergy sampled it. What about the queens and duchesses? Surely they were pure. Ha! Court gossip tells us otherwise. Behind their veils, Hungarian ladies had appetites as sharp as their husbands. Some bathed in milk with their servants, giggling as silk ropes from Venice were used for games. Others liked to dress as men, storming banquets, challenging noblemen to drinking contests, only to humiliate them later in private chambers. To the court, it was scandal. To them, it was sport. And then there was the army. Soldiers didn't just fight wars, they carried carnivals of cruelty with them. During campaigns, women were dragged along, camp followers, as the records politely say. But let's be clear, many were prisoners, forced to cook, march, and serve in ways far darker. In some camps, commanders treated women as prizes of gambling, won and lost over a dice roll. Can you imagine? Flesh as currency. Hungarian secret societies also left their stain. In taverns, behind locked doors, guild masters hosted brotherhood feasts. These weren't about faith or fraternity. These were drinking marathons where humiliation was the entertainment. Naked wrestling, forced rituals, and endless drinking games that ended in the same way. Someone stripped, someone shamed, and everyone laughing at the misery. Power wasn't just political, it was carnal. But perhaps the darkest stain lies in the punishment of women accused of sin. Adultery, witchcraft, even gossip could see them dragged into public squares. They were whipped, humiliated, sometimes worse, under the eyes of nobles who secretly enjoyed every moment. Judges read verses of law while secretly enjoying the suffering. It was justice on paper, cruelty in practice. And when Hungary fell under siege by Mongols, Ottomans, or their rivals, who bore the brunt? Not kings, not generals, the women. For in the ashes of war, bodies became the cheapest spoils. The chronicles don't record their names, but they record the screams. So when you hear about the glory of medieval Hungary, the glittering crowns, the shining saints, the chivalry of knights, remember the filth underneath. Behind every golden chalice was a broken goblet. Behind every hymn, a groan. Behind every saintly portrait, a sin scratched into the shadows. This was not just a kingdom. This was a carnival of cruelty. And here's the irony. They called themselves defenders of Christendom. Yet in their chambers they defended nothing. Not morality, not virtue, not even shame. Hungary's kings left castles, crowns, and cathedrals. But they also left whispers. Whispers of nights too filthy for daylight. Whispers that echo even now, if you dare to listen. So tell me, was this kingdom holy? Or was it hell dressed in silk?